I'm Carlo De Marchis, Chief Product and Marketing Officer at deltatre, and I'm here with Mark Lichtenhein. He will introduce himself because that's a bit longer than for my role. And why I'm talking to him. There is a press release issued by the European Commission on the 8th of February that is called Digital Single Market Portability of Online Content Services. And what it does basically, if we read what they say in a nutshell, is what is the objective of this? The objective is to ensure that Europeans who buy or subscribe to online content services providing access to films, sport, broadcast, music, ebooks and games at home are able to access when they travel in other EU countries. So that's what it says in a nutshell. And at the end there is a specific, and that's interesting, point on will the portability of sports online subscription be covered by the new rules? And they say yes, varied, etc., etc. So basically, people in the EU, they subscribe to any paid, because that's strict only for paid services, paid subscription services online, will be able to access it when they travel to other EU countries, which means, obviously, these services will need to understand and define what is an Italian customer, what is a French customer, and so on. And when I read that, I say, oh, okay, as we are, as deltatre, providing and managing a lot of OTT services with subscription, this is obviously something that when it becomes something that we need to abide to, which is I think beginning of 2018, it will have an impact on what we do. And then I thought, oh, there is a guy that I know in the business that is extremely opinionated by the subject, but also maybe can explain it better than I do, and it's Mark Lichtenhein. Mark.
Good morning. How are you, Carlo?
Good, thank you.
Yes, well, there's a lot going on in Brussels at the moment with the digital single market, that's for sure. You mentioned the portability regulation. This is something that I've been involved in for the last couple of years. Let me give you a little bit of reason why. So I have spent 20 years in sport, mainly in golf, as you well know, working closely with deltatre, with the European Tour when I was head of television and digital media. I'm now doing a number of different things, mainly as chairman of the Sports Rights Owners Coalition. So this is an organization that brings together over 50 of the main sports rights owners who work together on their underlying intellectual property rights. So this is not about the exact monetization of their rights, but it's the legal basis upon which that monetization is based. So we have members throughout all sports, from UEFA, FIFA, the Premier League, Bundesliga, through to golf with the European Tour, the PGA Tour, the Ladies European Tour, tennis, cricket, all the major sports are represented. So this digital single market is something that's focused our minds tremendously since it was announced in May 2015 as the number 2 priority of the current Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker. And there are many things about the digital single market which are actually very good and of which we're quite supportive. But there are some things which we are not, and we'll talk about those. Actually, the portability regulation that you mentioned is one of the things that we're actually broadly very supportive of. So obviously, if you are a subscriber to a digital service in one European state and you travel for holiday or for work to another, currently you'll find that your service is geo-blocked when you get to your destination. And the whole essence of the portability regulation is that if you are a bona fide customer in one member state, you should be able to consume that content in another member state. And we agree with that, as long as the rules are properly applied and people aren't abusing the system. Yeah. Because let's face it, if I get on an aeroplane in London with a copy of the Financial Times and I land in Turin, people don't take the newspaper off me because I'm not allowed to read it.
Exactly.
So, the same thing should apply really to your digital subscription. So this legislation, the press release you mentioned there, that was announced last week. That's really a little preemptive. It basically means that the Commission has agreed the text now with both the Parliament and the Council, or European Council, and we shouldn't really see any more amendments to it as it makes its passage through. So this means, as you say, that from next year, consumers will be able to take those subscriptions with them. Of course, there's still some details to be worked out. There needs to be complete reciprocation across Europe between all the television channels who offer these services. And the big thing that we insisted upon as the coalition was that there was robust verification that people actually do live in the state that they say they're in, and they're not trying to circumvent the system or try and get content that is more valuable in one member state than it is in another. At a lower price, because otherwise the whole market will break up. But generally, it's a good thing, and we're pretty supportive of it.
Yeah, so obviously our point of view is, so personally, I think portability is a good thing because I suffer so many times. I mean, like you, we travel a lot, and it's a bit funny. I mean, for example, for Netflix, I go to France and I watch more French movies, which can be good. Yeah. To be honest, it can be good. But obviously, if I have a sports subscription, and I think there are two angles. One is a media property that obviously normally is like country specific. So I would have a subscription in Italy. I go elsewhere, I cannot use it. That's really sucks. On the other hand, very often, if you go to the sport properties, right? We recently launched Tennis TV with ATP, new OTT platform. And if I move throughout Europe, and I'm paying for the service, that's obviously disappointing, and the content should be the same too. So I think that's very often sport properties will more and more have direct to consumer, whenever the case, with all the restriction of the media rights already sold, non-exclusive. That's a global service. So, but I understand that maybe we are talking about, 5% of the population, maybe depending on the countries, how many of these people are really traveling abroad. So,
well, I think you raise a very interesting point there about OTT services run by organizations, because if you're a sports rights owner and you are doing an OTT service, because of the nature of OTT, which generally, certainly at the moment, is more about delivering a service to the really diehard fans or plugging gaps in dark territories.
Yes.
You're probably going to have uniform pricing across the board. You're not going to have a different price necessarily. Maybe.
At the moment, it's in development. The more it becomes a business, in my experience and what I've seen, the more it will become diversified.
Well, possibly. I mean, but this is when the problem is going to arise, I think. Well, I know, because the underlying problem with the whole digital single market applying to content as opposed to other commodities and consumables. I mean, let me take a step back. So you need to see the digital single market in the overall context of the Commission's single market policy. Yeah. Now, I think we can all agree that a lot of things that have been done in the single market have been very good in terms of freedom of movement of capital, services, taking down trade barriers. And when you're dealing with things like energy, which is probably the biggest success story in the European single market, it works because I think every country wants energy. I don't think there's any country in the EU which is violently opposed to electricity or petroleum. So plus or minus, there's pretty uniform demand and therefore pretty uniform pricing. When you come to content, and specifically sport, film is slightly different, I accept, but in sport, the variations in value are enormous because it's not the same content which is in demand in each member state. It's not even the same competitions. So if you look at the value of, Serie A in Italy, obviously very high. The value of that same product in the rest of the EU is much lower. Some sports have very variable value. You take an extreme example like cricket. Cricket in the UK, very high value. Outside the UK, hardly any value. So it's not a question now. It's one thing if you're buying a motor car and it's pretty much the same price across the EU. Are you really going to go to another country to save yourself a few €100? Probably not. But in the case of sport, it could be free, like, cricket has been predominantly free across Europe. So if everybody in the UK got cricket at the Greek price, then the whole market for cricket.
So basically, just to understand, obviously, you're saying it's like it's the concept of arbitration in commodity stock markets. Okay, if it's the same commodity is a different price, someone will do arbitration, kind of. In this case, the user. So basically, if you can be as a right holders, if you can be guaranteed that there is a certain and secure way of recognizing a person as resident or whatever the rule will be, credit card of a specific country, that should not be a problem. And especially, I think it's important that if this guy decides to be an Italian guy, it should be for all services. So don't want to.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. It will have to be for
a unique register or something, but that should solve your problem. Your problem is okay, but if there is then an easy way, as online always there is an easy way to get, to become Greek immediately for that service, then it's destroying the value because the value is different country by country. That's your point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't really see that issue arising too much in portability because of the nature of the market. You're really protecting what exists. You're protecting the principle of copyright. Yeah. You're actually creating a legal fiction that the consumer is in a different jurisdiction. Well, they are in a different jurisdiction. You're maintaining that they're in their original jurisdiction, but they're actually consuming it somewhere else. Yeah. So that works, and that really is key to why we think this is a good model, because it upholds the principle of copyright and all the things that are done on a national basis. Because what the Commission doesn't seem to want to recognize, and now I'm getting into the wider implications here. Let's because there's a lot more things we can talk about in the digital single market, is that this is a good thing. This is a good thing for consumers. But once you get into the wider aspects of loosening exclusive territorial licensing, you are beginning to change the dynamics of the market. So what the Commission doesn't seem to want to recognize, it is actually the platforms and the television companies that are demanding this territorial exclusivity. Because let's face it, if you're operating in a given country, you want to have some security that you're going to be able to exploit that market. So you need to buy exclusive rights. That's really the whole basis of the way the market works. And it's not something dreamt up by rights owners so much as the demand of the market. We respond to what our customers want. So, moving beyond the portability part of it, there are two more key things which are really going to potentially disrupt this whole market. The first is unjustified geo-blocking. There's been a lot of talk about whether geo-blocking can be justified within the EU, within the single market. Yeah. And there are certain examples of differential pricing which is going on in goods which are arguably unjustified and potentially anti-competitive. But this is because these are commodities and these are things that shouldn't have a different price across the EU. When we're dealing with content, it really is a question of the demand and the value to a particular nation state or to a language group. So the ability to differentiate, as back in the example of cricket or winter sport in Austria, or things that are really high value, that can be marketed effectively in that country of origin, is a very different dynamic to selling stuff across Amazon or whatever. So the Commission has had a whole series of investigations into unjustified geo-blocking. For the time being, thankfully, they have agreed that audiovisual should be out of the scope of this geo-blocking regulation, which we welcome. But it is going to be up for review in maybe as little as 2 years, certainly in the next 4. And we know there are a lot of people still within the European Parliament who believe that audiovisual services shouldn't be geo-blocked. And there you have the kind of dichotomy, which is really at the heart of the whole digital single market debate, is can you continue to have exclusive territorial licensing, which the Commission has no problem with? Can you reconcile that with, well, you must be able to sell that to anybody who actually wants it? So, sure, I've sold this to Italy, but somebody from outside Italy should be able to buy it if they want to. I mean, this comes back to the whole QC Leisure case with the Premier League. You may remember with imported decoders. I don't want
with
to
the decoders,
legal basis, but you know, the European Court of Justice said, within reason, that there should be passive selling of decoders, and people should be able to watch a service that was intended for another country. But that's completely different to the internet. I mean, you know, the things, this kind of logistics that come with a satellite service, and
the number of people that will do it. I mean, it's
exactly. So when it's only a mouse click away, it becomes a very different.
I think another angle that I think you also covered in your article is, one thing is the legal part, but obviously content has value, not only because of what the sport is, etc., but obviously the language is another angle, and the coverage is also another angle. Because, and I want to move, if you want, to an example that is kind of implementing that by doing something different. Take Discovery for the Olympics, right? They bought the right for so many European countries. So basically, they created themselves a kind of digital single market. In theory, they have rights for, I don't remember, a big number of European countries. So it's like
54.
54, I wanted to say, but I didn't remember the number. They're basically, and they have this great concept of the Netflix of sport and every second counts. So a great digital coverage of the Olympics, which honestly, traditional linear TV with, 30 or whatever events at the same time, I'm always sad that the Olympics really need digital to be properly covered, at least for people that want to, follow different sports and different issues. It is clear that one thing is having the rights for many countries. One thing is especially for the Olympics, which is very different from a football match, to give the coverage that country, the people in that country, because of obviously the flag, which is one of the strong storytelling, engine. The hero, maybe that's universal. Usain Bolt is a universal hero, maybe. And then the specific sport. So I think, and I don't remember if Sports Pro, Sport Cal, or Sport Business called me 15 minutes after the news was there just to have an opinion. And I was, what do I say? And I said, I think covering properly in each country will be a struggle. Maybe they will sub-license. I think the content angle is partially protecting, if you do something in sport with no commentary and you distribute it, maybe if it's very cheap, people will still buy it. But it's like buying, sub-market. You still want the coverage to talk to you. I mean, I cannot accept an Olympic coverage that doesn't talk about the few Italians that do something at the Olympics, right? You need the color coverage, I think.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head with this example, Carlo, because, even Discovery will be the first to say that this is not a pan-European licensing arrangement. Well, it is a pan-European licensing arrangement, but it's a wholesale arrangement. It's not a retail arrangement. So this deal will be the most granular delivery of any Olympics, because as you say, if I'm in Hungary, I want to watch the Hungarian team doing well. If I'm in Slovenia, I want to see the Slovenian team doing well. There isn't a generic broadcast which is going to work. And Discovery, through Eurosport, already operate a very granular delivery of their content, which, as you say, customized to the cultural demands of the nation states to which they are broadcasting. And this is really the key, because if you break down, and it's obviously different if you have the scale of a Discovery where you've got enough channels into every single country to deliver that, even though they obviously will be sub-licensing. But let's say for a moment a broadcaster had channels in every single country, and they could customize the feed. Well, then you wouldn't really mind effectively, if somebody was wanting to watch the feed of another country. But that's not the way the market works right now. We don't have, apart from ironically American companies like Discovery and Fox, we don't have any European broadcasters operating on a pan-European basis. So the real risk here is particularly to the smaller countries that have pay TV operators or operate commercial TV operators in a particular language, in a particular territory. If they cannot secure the rights for that territory, then they're going to go out of business because they will be steamrolled over by a generic service. And this is really the problem, that people see this incredibly rich offer that we have across Europe, and they say, oh, well, it would be great if everybody could access that. Yes, but if everybody can access it, it won't exist, because then, for the
business fundamental goes down.
The business collapses. If you're the Bundesliga, you have a very vibrant market in Germany and a valuable market in Germany, but you're selling your rights cheaply in another member state, and everybody in Germany could access that cheaper offer, well, then why would they have the German offer? So what effectively you would do, as any sort of national league, you would only license to your biggest market, obviously. And then, actually, this would then be detrimental to the people outside your core market, because they would now have to pay the German price rather than the local price to access that content.
But I think, and maybe it can be, maybe in 2 years, another talk like this, the full DSM implementation, it's like you have to go to ground zero and rethink completely the business. Because I've tried with you in some cases, with other people, to simulate what it would happen. But it's like, really, you need to start from zero, because nothing is the same. You cannot think someone is buying all the... It doesn't... I mean, it's another business. So it has a huge impact.
And I mean, this is the real risk that we see. That the risk is not in the portability regulation. The risk is further downstream, with where the combination of no geo-blocking, and then perhaps the most important piece of legislation, which has only just come on the table, the copyright directive, which I wrote about, and the copyright regulation, moreover, that I wrote about last week in the Parliament magazine, is that extending the country of origin principle, which exists in the satellite and cable world, which was intended to facilitate intended and unintended overspill from one country into the neighboring countries, which is arguably a good thing when you have people speaking the same language. Close. I mean, it's the classic example for, because you have Switzerland, you have northern Italy, you have bits of Luxembourg. So there is obviously demand for German language content, and by clearing the content in Germany, the country of origin principle in SATCAB allows you to distribute to those neighboring countries. Taking that principle onto the internet, which is what is now on the table, is a completely different ball game altogether. Because it means anybody in the EU could now potentially broadcast to the rest of Europe. And that would severely undermine the market, particularly if it was in the English language, or a language that most people understood. So this is where we see the risks going forward, not so much in the legislation which is about to be passed, and particularly the portability regulation.
Okay, so wrapping up, I think welcome portability for now. We have to do some work to implement it properly, and let's see what happens with the bigger schema, I would say, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's another thing on the horizon which is also important for everybody to understand, which is not a regulation in itself, but it is a competition inquiry which is going on at the moment into the Hollywood studios and Sky in the UK, which again brings up this whole issue of passive selling of content. Now, I don't know what passive selling on the internet looks like, because it's difficult to see what the difference is between active and passive selling on the internet. If Amazon's doing passive selling, it's doing a very good job, I have to say. So it's not immediately obvious what that means. But it does mean that it is anti-competitive to stop people from accessing digital content from another member state, combined with this lack of the eradication of copyright outside the country of origin, then as a rights owner, you really have nothing to fall back on. Copyrights are, and the contractual freedom that comes with the territorial licensing is gone as well. Okay. And that really would usher in pan-European licensing, which, as you say, and we've discussed, is not really in the interests of the consumer.
Yeah. At the end, one last thing that I saw in other business, even in the past, you always need to keep the consumer in mind, especially because we are talking a paying consumer. So the concept of frictionless, one of the big success of the big subscription services, Spotify, Netflix, is that one, the product is very simple to understand, is one product, whatever the platform. There are no artificial barriers, and it's, I say, frictionless. Yeah. And that's what, because these people are paying. So I think all of what we said is great, but if you lose focus, you open, if you want you give a bigger space to piracy or to disaffection, or, with all even the issue that we have with the younger generation that really maybe don't sit still on the couch for hours to watch something like, this is what we're discussing this in the last, 7 years, 5 years, but you see the number is still, TV is still there, etc., 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 but still there is a disaffection for sport that is eroding a bit. I'm not saying it's a huge, if you want, challenge for now, but we have to be careful. And that's something you need to consider at any step in this discussion and in the way the business is moving, I think.
Absolutely.
Va bene. Thank you, Mark.
Va bene. Thank you.
A lot of good information. Ciao.
Okay,
Have fun for the rest of the year. Ciao, ciao.
Bye now. Bye now.